Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Volpe Creates show. It's been a while since we had one, um, but I'm glad to be back. I, of course, am your host, Chris Volpe, joined as always by Baby and Pumpkin over there. I think they're about to start something. They're like staring at each other, like something's about to go down. And of course, Mr. Lucas. How are you doing today? Yeah, have you? It doesn't seem like it. Yeah, just I feel like we just sit around most of the day, right?
Definitely not. We are so busy. That's the reason we haven't had the show in so long.
Yeah, that's why I look like this because I need a nap. Um. Uh. So I guess we'll do a little housekeeping just because it's been a hot minute. We do plan on getting back to our weekly shows. Obviously, I moved and that kind of screwed stuff up. And then last week we had a time issue, but we want to get back weekly chat. So we'll be posting those on our Twitter at Volpe Creates. So you can follow those. That's usually where we post all the upcoming guests. And then you can join us on our Discord at volpecreates.com/Discord. So just a little housekeeping for everybody, but let's get started because I unfortunately have a hard stop today because I got yet another meeting in the barrage of meetings this week. But we are joined this week by Jordan Fehr, who has been a longtime buddy of GDEX and part of the games industry here in Columbus and Central Ohio. But you've also done a ton of other stuff. But you are on the sort of sound design, audio design side of things, right? You want to give us a little quick blurb about who you are, where you come from?
Yeah. That's mostly right. I started in music and then I went to school for sound design for linear media, mostly film and stuff like that, to add more audio skills onto that. And then I worked in games for, over a decade. And right now I'm working on a lot of podcasts and getting back into music a little bit. Um, and you might know me from some indie games like Super Meat Boy or the Hotline Miami franchise, or Donkey Kong Country Returns for the Wii, things like that.
Yep.
I sound effects stuff is what I do on games.
Yeah, I want to back into games. Actually, started podcasting just for fun because that's kind of what we're doing here. But I do remember when we met. I don't even know, was it 8 years ago or something? And we were chatting, and you'd mentioned that you'd worked on both Super Meat Boy and Hotline Miami, which were Hotline Miami for me in particular was a game I really grooved on. I platinumed that game. And when you told me that, I was like, that's really cool. That's really cool. Well, let's talk about podcasting just for a second, because I think like the world is awash in podcasts these days, right?
It is a bit, yeah.
So did you jump into that realm because like you had a deep interest in podcasts, or has it just become such a, I don't know, prolific thing that it became a good use of skills and time from like a business perspective?
Yeah, I mean, initially it was more of the second thing, right? Like most people had some sort of pivot around March of 2020 or summer of 2020, right? I mean, the pandemic did lots of things for lots of people, good and bad,
Sure did.
um, on the career side. And I I don't know, because of some other stuff that was going on previously, I was feeling like maybe I didn't want to do interactive stuff all the time anymore. Like I was pining for the linear media stuff that I used to work on, and the complexity of integration and the technical sound design side of middleware and stuff is getting so complicated now. And I prefer the sound design side to that, like creating in the middleware stuff. And yeah, I had been talking to some other colleagues, and some people were working on podcasts that they and got some opportunities that they needed to go do and wanted to pass that work off. And I was like, yeah, I can dialogue edit real well, no problem. Like I'll work on this chat show on the side. And turned out I kind of liked the workflow and the stability of it. Um, as we all know, when you work on games, it takes a very long time to make them, and the pay can be very erratic, and
Yeah.
sometimes you don't get paid till it's over. And I kind of like the billing people every couple weeks
Sure.
thing that I haven't had in like 14 years.
Well,
Um,
I think during the pandemic too, just being able to stabilize your finances is just a godsend, you know?
well, and
Um,
we're not 22 anymore. Like
we're not?
it's I'm
Lucas,
not.
why didn't you tell me?
Um, and so that weird hustle and grind thing that I was into when I
Yeah.
was like 22 is just not, I don't know. But anyway, once I started doing it, I started liking it a lot more. And there's a lot of different opportunities within it, right? With all these audio dramas and stuff. The sound design can I'm working on mostly chat shows at the moment. And that's just one part of what I'm doing. I'm also recording classical music and doing music mastering, which is like my new obsession. Um,
Were you set
but
up for like remote work and everything when the pandemic hit? Like
yeah,
did
yeah, yeah.
you had
I've
predominantly
been doing
worked?
this forever.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah, it seems like most people in the music and sound design space are you've been remote just doing your thing for quite a
yeah, I mean,
while.
when I got out of school in like 2008, out of post secondary school, I interviewed for a lot of in-house gigs, but with the catch 22, nobody would hire me because I hadn't actually worked at a studio. And so I became a freelancer sort of by necessity at first. And then when Super Meat Boy did what it did, I just kept working for indies because indie people needed better sound and I didn't have to move and then get fired and then move again. And the triple A
Yeah.
uh thing that happens
Yeah,
until yeah, go ahead.
we're working on a couple things behind the scenes here that hopefully we'll be able to announce. I don't know before the end of the year. I hope, but yeah, just the market for how game development works in just like an employment space has become. I mean, I think COVID definitely kicked it, but it's almost entirely like movies now, where it's very project driven, and so you get brought on for a project. And you know everyone's a contractor. It seems like these days, and um, I'm a little I'm a little worried about it. I guess in the sense that like I don't know if you can sustain an entire industry on just like contractors all the time. Particularly in the United States where your benefits are directly tied to full time employment. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, it's happening in every space of the United States, though. Like the gig economy is just becoming ubiquitous, and our other systems need to catch up, right? So, like for
yeah.
example, trying to buy a house or something when you're not like a full time office worker, like the underwriters don't understand
Oh,
our
totally.
job.
Before I just moved into a new apartment, but I was looking at houses. I decided the market was all crazy and I was going to wait. But yeah, they're like, can you give us 2 years of employment history W-2s? I was like, well, I own my own business, so I can't give you a W-2. And they're like, well, can you give me like some pay stubs or whatever? I was like, I can give you the deposits I make on the check site, right? And then on top of that, uh, for showing just 2 years of employment, you know, if you're jumping from project to project, and that's almost impossible.
Right. They see a gap in the like income deposits and they go, "What is this?" And you're like, "But these things that are 2 months apart are large checks. Like, don't
Yeah.
you?" And they don't care. Like it's so weird. Um
So you've been working on podcasting and whatnot because you found that interesting. Is there because Lucas and I are always thinking about how to like. I mean, this show isn't really a podcast, I guess. I don't know. I don't know what the hell the show is. But have you noticed any interesting trends in the podcasting space since you've been doing it?
Well, actually, I was just reading an article. Like, was it the New Yorker? Like, New York Magazine, maybe? I can't remember the other day where they were talking about how the phenomenon that was Serial when that podcast came out,
Yeah.
like how every person in the country was listening to one podcast. And now podcasts are so explosive and it's so oversaturated almost. Like it's just become essentially like radio. I'm not an expert on the podcast space by any means or its trends right now, but it seemed like the exact parallel to what happened with the iPhone App Store when that stuff first started. Like, we can all name like the first 12 hits on the iPhone App Store, um, and how everybody was playing the same thing. And now it's just it's not to say that you can't make money in this space anymore, but they were essentially saying like there will never be another serial in terms of that sort of hit, and trying to like frame your podcast business around making that is unrealistic because the space in which they exist has changed. I also find it funny that podcasts are named after a device that is no longer made,
Yeah.
um because they discontinued the iPod this year.
The power of Apple, man. They just make things and then the world adopts them. Well, at least they did when Steve Jobs was around. Um, yeah, like this podcast is not like a money making endeavor or anything. We just invite friends on and talk about the industry. I want to create kind of like a learning experience. I'm also a teacher, so having the opportunity for people to, sorry, pumpkin, ask questions and just learn about folks who have been in the industry is the goal here.
Yeah.
But we recently popped over on Twitch into, I don't even know what it is. There's the affiliates, whatever it is. It's like the first rung, and like they take 50% of the ad revenue. And I was like, that is insane. Like that's a lot of money. I know you're doing the platform. I know you're providing the whatever, but like you're not finding like sponsorships for me. You're not an agent for me. And people have been complaining about the App Store taking 30% for a decade. And it just seems like I know YouTube is having the same thing. A lot of people who are YouTubers are complaining about how their revenues are getting cut. And it reminds me of the game space with all the the PlayStation Store and everything. Like it's just becoming so tight on your profits. Like there's no real room. You need to make sure that like your dev budget is to the T.
Yeah.
I remember, I don't know if you remember when oh god, what was it? Was it Tomb Raider? Oh geez. Yeah, like I think it was the first Tomb Raider game sold something like 8 million units. And
Oh
then
yeah, they were like it was a commercial failure.
yeah, during their annual stockholders meeting, they're like it's a commercial. Like what? How can 8 million units in like the first 30 days be a failure? It seems like just our general sense of how we in the industry, in the game space in particular, conduct business is just kind of, I don't know if it's everyone's just like, we're just trying to make this stuff work and nobody has a handle on it. I don't know what the answer is, but it's kind of nuts.
AAA games have and Hollywood films have just ballooned to just budgets that are hard to even understand as a normal person, like the amounts of money that they're talking about and that they need on the return to make up for their like marketing budget and stuff.
Yeah.
And then meanwhile you have like Netflix that's putting out more than a movie a week, and so many that they can't even market them. Like
Sure.
there are movies that I see with big names in them, and I'm like, I didn't even hear that came out.
Oh yeah, totally.
It's
Yeah, the same
bizarre.
with, I've gotten into this pattern where I will like, for like a month I'll watch Netflix, and then a month I'll watch Hulu, and a month I'll watch Amazon. And it just seems like every time I circle back around to the platform, there's a whole new list of shows or movies that I can check out. But as long as Netflix keeps making the Princess Switch movies, then I'm down. I think I love that series is amazing.
Before we get off of podcasts, the one thing that I have found really interesting that I have learned about it in the past year or so is that I just assumed that all podcasts exist to generate ad money to pay for themselves or and eventually get the people who host them to make that their full-time job, like the McElroy family or something.
Yeah.
But turns out that there are a lot of different reasons to have a podcast. I mean,
Okay.
obviously there are the people who are just doing it for the love of the game, like anything. Um, but there are also like take these after shows, for example, like Euphoria's after show or like the House of the Dragon, or I don't
Yeah.
actually know if there
What's
is one of those, but
the Talking Dead was like an after
yeah,
show that
sure.
like I think that kind of started that.
So those
Um,
shows and shows like that primarily exist to drive people to watch the thing that they're about. Like they don't care if that podcast makes money, loses money, none of that. It's purely part of the marketing plan for the show itself, which is interesting.
okay. So it's in
Um,
essence like a loss leader then for their product.
yeah, and so podcasts have become part of those plans when you make them now. It's like, we'll do this thing for a year while the first season is on, and then and then that's the end of it because it just exists to drive people to a different place.
Yeah.
Um, just one example, and I thought that was kind of fascinating. Like, life is so weird. I'm working on a podcast with two of the cast members of the original Brady Bunch who are watching the TV show that they did, what, 50 years ago, some of which they haven't seen since they filmed it when they were like
Yeah.
13.
I've
And
I've heard about some of those shows.
and
I
it seems like obviously they're trying to, or we are trying to, get that sold by a big platform, because why wouldn't you want to do that? Like, get iHeartRadio or Spotify to buy it. But that's not really what it's all about for these guys, right? It's just
sure.
to, they're just trying to stay in the space of their fans, right?
Yeah, yeah. I guess ultimately, depending on how you're coming at it, because I know that the two kids from The Sopranos have their own podcast. Um,
Sure, like two of the women from The Office, like it just
yeah. The It's Always Sunny folks have their own podcast. I mean, that show's still relevant because they're still making content and stuff. But yeah, so that's kind of interesting. Are there any other interesting products you're allowed to talk about that you've worked on recently?
I'm producing one that hasn't been announced yet, so I can't talk about that one, much like you can't talk about your exciting
Yeah,
thing. Um I did I did some there's lots of different things you can do. Like, I one of the weird things I was doing when I first got into it was editing pilots for shows that never materialized. Like, that even happens in the podcast space. People have an idea and a pitch, and then the production company will get the thing made and punched up, and then everybody will sort of decide whether or not they're going to actually invest in the thing. And I
uh,
just, got paid for my work, and the
yeah.
shows don't exist.
Do they
Um,
still do pilots in the TV space? It seems like they just like, let's just do a
I think they
show.
would have to for network TV, but for Netflix and Hulu and stuff, I have no idea, because it's not like, they would shoot the pilot and then a year later make the rest of the season like they used to during
Yeah,
TV pilot season. They just make the whole thing.
yeah. That's what it seems like. They just say, let's just do a season of it and see what happens. Sometimes shows get. I'm trying to. There was a show I watched recently, like within the past year, that got canceled like mid-season, and I was like, oh, that sucks. But usually they commit to at least a season. So it sounds like you're sort of enjoying the transition for a while, getting enough work in and everything.
Yeah, I mean, interactive audio and interactive creation in general is just a totally different type of thing than working on something linear. And it's been nice to go back to what I started editing with. And I do wonder if this is all going to just take me back to dialogue editing for film or TV or something eventually later, instead of sound effects. Um,
Yeah,
I mean, when I worked on film, I worked on all of it, like dialogue, Foley, sound effects, music. And, if you're working on independent projects, you end up editing and mixing all of the different parts instead
sure.
of like a big project would have separate people on all those different elements. Um, Same with games, right? And freelancers just wear a lot of hats.
Yeah, we do. Yeah,
But
we do.
yeah, I'm. Oh, my cat's gonna
Yeah,
play
your
with her
cat's got
mouse.
something.
Cool.
So
Gotta have
well,
zoomies while we're on the stream.
yeah. Well, let's jump into to games then. So before we talk
Yeah.
about sort of the latter part of your career, what got you into the game space? You know, how'd you get that foot in there?
Yeah, I mean, people always, students and stuff will ask me for advice, and it's like, well, everything's completely different now than it was then. It's sort of always the answer, and I mean, I'm a lifelong gamer like all of us probably. Got that NES when I was 4 and never looked back.
Nice.
My father just passed recently, and I found a bunch of pictures, and there's like a picture of me with the Nintendo light gun, like literally pressed up to the glass on the CRT
Mm-hmm.
when I was like 5 years old, just cheating at Duck Hunt.
Yep.
So good.
Oh, we've all been there.
Um, but yeah, I was originally in school for music composition. That's what my bachelor's is in, and I realized sort of towards the end of college that that isn't what I wanted to do for a living, like happens to people in college. Um, just the composer's professional life didn't agree with me when I started talking to people who would come and visit about like how that all works. Still love music, obviously, but just don't have the temperament and the specific type of skills for that. Where someone says like, "We need something that sounds like this, and we need it in 2 weeks." Like, that's just not gonna be me.
Yeah.
Um, and and then, like a lot of people, a bunch of really impactful sound movies came out, and I was like, "Maybe that's a good path for me." And then when I went to school at Vancouver Film School for sound design, I realized, like, immediately, like, yeah, this is where I'm locking in. And there weren't a lot of schools that taught game audio stuff, so I had to sort of do that myself on the side. Now, back then, there was a lot less middleware, so it was a lot more doing the work on the asset side and then needing to be able to communicate with your programmers. So I had some sort of general programming experience, but not very good at it, but enough to be like, yeah, I know what you're doing with your C++ over there. And this is what I want the sounds to do. And I understand the basics of computer logic and things like that. Um, and like I said earlier, I got out of school and I applied to lots of studios, some of which don't even exist anymore. One of which I was very close to getting hired at and would have had to move to another city. And then they released a game and it completely tanked and like everybody got fired. So sometimes you dodge a bullet.
Totally.
And so I was just working a day job and grinding at night and going on like the Newgrounds forums and like looking for people who were making flash games just to because I was noticing that independent games and flash games and browser games and other things like that just had sounds from like freesound.com or like a plugin that would just make some beeps and boops and they just like were hit a button till it made something that sounded okay and put that in because it sounded like an Atari. And I was like, I have a lot of skills and pretty low overhead right now in central Ohio. And I could probably really offer these people something. And I found Edmund McMillan and on these internet forums, and we worked on a little flash game called Spewer, where you like they worked on these dynamic fluid physics, and then just there's this little you can probably still find it online, although I don't know. Flash is dead. Um, this little
R.I.P.
character who would vomit this fluid, and you use the fluid to solve the puzzles, basically. Um, and I worked on that, and we were like, he had never worked with an audio person before ever, and because all of us were just people with laptops in a bedroom, and his art was really weird and unique, and I was able to contribute to that with all the gross sound effects that it required to feel real. And we were like, okay, this worked out. And he was like, so I got this other game, this Flash game called Meat Boy, and we're like selling it to these console people to make like a new version from the ground up and put it out. Do you have time for a project like that? And I was like, yeah. So I was working at a Jewish deli and like taking home leftover meat and fat and stuff and trying to record that, and none of us knew that that game was going to sell a lot. It just so
Sure.
happens that when that was going on was when like Xbox Live and stuff like that first became a thing, because before that, indie game developers had no path to the console, right?
Yep.
Because console overheads, manufacturing of discs, things like that were completely out of the realm of possibility for our budgets, right? But then,
Even getting like a dev kit could be a couple hundred
right.
$1,000s.
But then stuff like Steam and Xbox Live Arcade came out, and Microsoft was sending people like this dev kits. And I want to say originally Super Meat Boy was supposed to come out on the Wii first, but then we ran into problems with both the download size limit on the Wii eShop and the general tone of the video game for a Nintendo platform.
I could see that. Yeah.
And Microsoft was really all in, and they wanted to put it on the like that summer of arcade thing that they had for a few years with stuff like Braid and Explosion Man, and
Yeah.
it just it was the right place at the right time. And then you know, even though I was a stupid kid with a bad contract, um, and none of us knew it was going to sell that many copies, it became like the flagship name on my resume to then work for more indies, right? And
Yeah.
so that's how I did it. But I mean, okay, I guess what it sounds like is I just told a story about how I got really lucky, but there was all that time I spent, working my day job and working on the skills and
Yeah. Honing your skills.
and going to a school for 12 months.
Yeah.
And
Well, that's
while the dollar was tanking, by the way, I was like, I got to pay as much tuition as humanly possible before the Canadian dollar goes above the dollar in 2008.
yeah.
Was a bit of a
Yeah.
recession
How
then.
many slices of ham can pay for a semester of tuition?
Oh, God.
Um, yeah, I mean, you and I are both in this sort of same age group, and I talk about this all the time with students and stuff because they ask that question, and I think it's a good meeting question, like how do you get in the industry, like blah blah, and like what am I supposed to tell them? Like I went to school for fine arts photography, then I went to pre med. Then I got a graduate degree in public health and another one in health administration, and now I make video games. Like that
Yeah.
ain't the way to do it, you know?
The only
And
advice that I ever heard that I thought was worth a damn was because I was like, okay, I'm graduating from this school. There are other schools with people graduating. There are people graduating with me, and we all want these jobs, and there aren't enough of them, and nobody will hire us without experience, and blah, blah, blah. And at one point, I forget who it was, someone just said to me, just don't quit. And I was like, well, that's stupid advice. And he was like, no, but seriously, just don't quit, because if you keep at it and you get really good at what you do, eventually a lot of these other people that you're worried about are going to give up. And I realize there's an economic component to that where like not everybody has the luxury of not giving up.
yeah,
And I don't want, give up sounds like failure, which like getting a day job and supporting yourself is not failure. And a lot of us, there's an image that nobody has a day job when like everybody does, especially at first, um, before games can become your day job. Um, but there's a lot of truth to that because I just kept grinding away and not getting hired. And even after I had a big hit on my resume, I kept grinding away and not getting hired. And also, I guess the only other thing I would say is that there is actually nothing wrong with uh cold emailing and cold calling people. You want to be nice to everyone because you don't know where anyone that you met in the past is going to be later.
That is a huge thing. Like people, once you start getting into any industry, but games, it seems especially so, despite it being global, despite it being like, it is a tight knit community. And you would be surprised, the 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or whatever.
Yeah.
You would be surprised how many degrees away you are, particularly once you're in the industry for a while. I regularly bump into somebody who knows somebody and I'd be like, how do you two even know each other?
Right.
Or, I mean, there's been times where like I've bumped into somebody and they've heard of me because they were talking to somebody else or they might have read an article or something. It is a small industry.
You want to be nice. You want to be humble. You want to, what's that saying that's like, you can't be in the right place at the right time if you're not there in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Like eventually I stopped going to conventions and events because the return was not worth how expensive it was to do. But early on, I went to all that stuff like GDC, PAX. I was, and when you go to events like that, don't go up and talk to people with the intention of stuffing a business card in their mouth. You want to go with the intent of starting a conversation. You all like the same stuff. There's lots of stuff to talk about. And the one of the mistakes that I and lots of other people have made in the past that I know better about now is I was like, "Oh, so and so's working on like such a big thing now. Like I got to make sure that I go talk to him." Um Like, what's an example? The Mojang people were
Mm-hmm.
were were getting into their next project after Minecraft one time when I was at GDC, and I knew they were looking for a sound designer for that card game or whatever that kinda never took off eventually anyway. Um, but I was like, I gotta network with all those guys. I know 2 of the guys who just got hired as composers, like, I gotta get my foot in there. If I could get sound effects on that, like, I'd be set forever. They got so much money, and I was like, I made that a goal, but the thing is, the people working on the giant projects or who have already blown up, they already know a lot of people who can do all of the different things. What's a more useful what's a way to more usefully spend your time is to make friends and lots of connections with the people on your level because you all raise each other up after that,
Yeah.
right? Like the most useful and repeat clients that I ever had were the people who started at my level, not like some whale at the top who happened to hire me.
Yeah.
And I only know that now from looking back at it. So making lots of friends and connections and colleagues at your own level, then somebody gets a great gig and says like, now I've got the budget to hire out all of the people that I know who are hungry for all these jobs on this project. And maybe that's you, maybe that's a friend who then pulls you up. But I think that's a much more useful networking thing than going for that really lucky break where you bump into the big star who's like, you know what, I'll take a chance on this kid. Like it's just not a realistic goal.
Yeah. Yeah. I think networking, I think gets a bad rap from the kind of like, you know, corporate Wall Street, Wolf of Wall Street
Yeah.
kind of just vibe, American Psycho kind of thing. Um, look at networking as a way to I'm just meeting new acquaintances and new friends. And if a business opportunity falls out because of that, which can be hard when you're first getting started, you're eager to get into something, or like rent's coming up and you're like, I just need a gig. But if you give it time, then eventually you'll start to get to a point, and I think we're kind of getting to that point, which is nice. Where like work is coming to us. Like I don't have to be as out there doing biz dev as I used to, and
That's always the goal because it
yeah,
takes up so much of your freelance time.
it does. And you talk about the early days, like watch out pumps, open about this. But when we first started Multivarious, like I cashed out my retirement from OSU, and for the first 3 or 4 years, Tom's on Discord, he can attest, we were paying ourselves like 24 grand a year.
Sure.
It was like nothing. And keep in mind,
That's
like,
what I was telling those kids when I used to be on your panels at GDEX. like we had that one panel that one year where it was me and another audio guy who was working on the Forza series to talk about like here's the freelance remote side and here's the AAA in-house side. And it was like, yeah, with all these taxes and stuff, I'm pulling in like a cool 28K. You can do it, kids.
Yeah. I mean, we were making no money, and that was with me pulling out my retirement and using that to seed the company and stuff. And yeah, it's not a place, I was fortunate that I had a lot of student loan debt and stuff, but I was able to keep my expenses, relatively low and had a lot of support around me. But it's hard. But a lot of the things where you can do you mentioned like GDC, for example, that's pricey.
So expensive.
The tickets, I mean, you can volunteer and maybe get a free ticket, but you're still in San Francisco. You're still paying quite a bit for hotels and stuff. The same with,
half the times I went, I got a free expo pass because a game that I worked on was like up for a nomination, and just the plane tickets and the hotel was already so expensive. And
yeah,
I didn't even pay for a pass.
PAX is the same way. It's going to be pricey. The nice thing about PAX is at least the tickets are more consumer level than GDC is. But there's things you can do, like find your local game dev group or tech community group. That's free. Go meet people there. I plug GDEX all the time. Come on. Because
and I think one of the things that is around now that wasn't around when I started are these game jams, right? Like go in there and make a game with people in a week. Just, you stick to your lane, whatever your strength is. And then all those people, and you got a lot of practice in, although I don't condone crunch in any way.
Yeah. We do a GDEX game jam now. We started that in 2020 because of the pandemic, and people have just been wanting us to keep doing it. So we do it every year. I assume we'll probably do it this year. But then Global Game Jam is a big one. I think that's another great way. But just go meet people, even if you're gonna go like PAX. I'm like the worst. I'm the worst. I go to PAX East like every year. I haven't for the past few years for obvious reasons, but I'm like the worst at actually going to PAX because like I'll go to PAX, but like I don't go and play games on the floor. I don't really go and attend any of the sessions. Like I'm like having lunch with this person or going to drinks afterwards with this person. Like I'm using it as like I've got 4 days to meet people and let's just go chat and have fun. And sometimes for GDEX, I'll go and hit the show floor so we can talk to devs about GDEX and maybe pull them out to Columbus for the show. But that's really like, that's an important thing. And if you know somebody, if you're already building that network ahead of time, then you've got a list in your phone when you're walking around, you'll be like, hey, Jordan, what's up? What are you up to? I'm like, I'm having drinks with this guy from wherever. Do you want to come? I'm like, yeah, sure. That's how you start building it.
There are people now who just fly to where those events are and don't even go to the event. And they're just like, I know everyone's gathering near the Moscone Center. I'm not even going to buy a pass because the stuff in there is for press. And I mean, to some extent, it depends on what you do in games, whether or not that stuff is worth it for you. But like, consider if you're someone who's looking for a development job, the people showing their games on the floor, that's a team of people who already work there. Like they don't have a spot for you. Doesn't mean you shouldn't network or meet them, but yeah.
And like we jump around a lot in this industry too. So somebody who's
absolutely
like our guest, who was supposed to be last week, but she couldn't make it. She was the head of the IGDA for a while, and now she goes and works at Phoenix Labs. And we, as an industry, we move around every 2 or 3 years to different stuff. So you never know who's doing what.
No, it's never bad to meet anyone. And I loved shaking hands with all the people who are making cool stuff and then seeing their game blow up like after I met them.
Yeah.
Like Super Meat Boy was next to Bastion in the PAX 10 that year. And I was just like, hey, cool. Look at you. Your art's so cool. Darren Korb, your music's so great. And then I hope that game sells really well. And like,
yeah,
look at Supergiant now. They're one of my favorite developers. Who seemingly can do no wrong. And everyone on their team is so stupidly nice to everyone.
That is a big thing too that I think in general, and this is actually how I kind of can gauge a person a little bit, like if they're an asshole, because most of the people that are in the industry that are like full time working on it, crunching at places, like they're the nicest people. This industry just has a lot of great, nice people. The jerks, the assholes, are usually the ones that are like trying to break in. Occasionally, you get like the diva developer or whatever,
Yeah.
but most of the time, the folks that are actually in the trenches, because man, we're just too tired to be jerks. You know, like we got work to do. We want to hang out, meet people.
Yeah,
Um,
and social media can really grind you down because all we hear about are all the people doing abuses in AAA, AA, and indie game
yeah.
studios. Like that's because social media and the news is all the negative stuff, and
Hmm.
obviously that stuff is going on, and you need to be very watchful of it. And if you're a woman or a person of color, like, yes, things are going to be harder for you and it's all terrible. And if anyone is in a position to be hiring people, they should be thinking about that stuff. But like, on the same token, right? If there are any people interested in audio who are listening to this, the audio community on Twitter is the only reason I still have Twitter. Like they're so supportive and good and nice. And there are some Discord rooms for field recording and sound design and stuff like that that have migrated over to Discord from, the old mailing lists that were awful to interface with. And
Hmm.
it's such a supportive community.
That's awesome.
And
I feel like
like
you music and sound folks are pretty awesome. At
for the
G,
most part, yeah.
I've said this to you before, but at GDEX, I'm always asking people like, what do you want? What kind of content do you want? Who do you want me to bring? And you would think, as we're sort of a developer slash consumer show, you would think that programming and stuff would be the most requested, and it's not. It's usually in the top 3 or 4, but like audio, sound composition, audio design, and voice acting are always like number one generally, what people
Sure.
want the most of. Um, and I think that probably has a little bit to do with like you and Sean and DB and stuff, like helping us spread the word. Um, but we always get a lot of just really interesting and excited folks in the audio space, which I think is cool.
Yeah. And and if you're out there grinding it and trying to get these gigs, and it's important to stick with it and also use that time, the cover letters and the applications and networking and stuff does grind you down. I'm not someone who likes to get in front of people and try to sell myself. I hate it. It takes so much energy out of
Yeah,
me that like I have to rest afterwards, like when I
I
do a
hear you.
job interview or something like that. Um, but also spend time doing the thing that got you excited about trying to get these jobs in the first place. Like spend that time practicing in the audio space, for example. One of the ways to do that is to, pull trailers, pull CGI stuff, and then wipe all the sound out and redesign it, recompose to it. Like keep your stuff sharp so when somebody's ready, you're you're ready to go.
Yeah,
Because sometimes that's how it happens, right? Like when I got that contract gig working with Retro on the Donkey Kong game for Nintendo, it was just like I cold emailed the studio because I had met someone there at a convention and I had his card, and I was like, I'm just going to follow up and cold email him and be like, I got free time, put me in your Rolodex, because I know sometimes they have enough work that they need to hire some contractors to help fill it out. And he emailed me back like 12 minutes later and was like, something's happening. Like, we need a guy. And I was like, I'm that guy. Like, and
yeah.
call me. And it was just like, okay, I'm ready.
See, I
Um,
mean, you took, and it wasn't that many steps, but you took a couple steps to put you in a position where that
right.
opportunity could present itself.
It didn't just happen because I was on Twitter. It happened because I put myself in the right place, which is not to say that Twitter is not useful, but
I don't like
because
Twitter.
I know some really nice. I hate Twitter, but I know some really nice audio people that I've never met in person, who
Sure.
I might call if someone came to me with a gig that I couldn't take, because I'm like, this person's nice and talented and hungry, and no, I can't entirely vouch for them because I don't know them all the way personally, but, like, I would connect these 2 people and have them talk to each other. Um,
Yeah, that's another big thing when I talk about the industry, being nice or whatever. I've worked in many other industries, and I always kind of go back to film when I make this comparison because I've worked with people in film. Maybe your experience is the same, maybe it's different, but at least in mine, I found it really, really hard when interacting with folks in the film industry to like get contacts. There's this sense that
yeah,
this is my contact,
yeah.
what are you going to do for me? Then I'll connect to this person. Whereas in the game space, I mean, I have talked to some people who are like way up in the, like heads of Xbox and things like that. And I don't think never once have I ever met anyone who was like, no, I won't do that. Like they're like, oh yeah, I know this guy. Let me send you an email,
Yeah.
in an email introduction. And I think that's a big reason why our industry is successful because despite its flaws, uh, we sort of have this cohort mentality, I think, in a lot. And like when people lose their jobs, like a big, you mentioned Mojang, there was a few other ones over the past 5 years when there's like big firings. Like a lot of the other studios seem to step up and they're like, hey, contact us. We'll see if we can help you find a new place or whatever.
Yeah, I can't really say enough good things about Bungie right now. Like, they're staffing up for all these big projects. They have this ongoing content with Destiny.
Mm-hmm.
They're hiring everybody. They're like, "Someone's being a jerk to you, come work at Bungie." They're like, all these studios now that the pandemic is over, which if you can't see me doing air quotes, it's not. But one of the things that was so positive about the pandemic, which is just a weird sentence to say, is how much the remote work is being accepted.
Yeah,
I've been waiting like 12 years for that to happen, because only certain people would hire me, but I prefer to do it this way because I don't want to
sure.
move around and then have to move again when you fire me. But so it's
My
more
my
and more
wife
acceptable. Yeah, go
my,
ahead.
my wife works at IBM, and she's been doing that for I don't know 15 years or something at this point, and she's been working remotely for like 12 of those 15 or whatever.
I just
And yeah,
once the tools got to a certain place in like, 2010, 2012, I was just like, there's no reason why we can't do it this way. You just don't want to do it this way. And now that everyone had to do it this way, they realized, oh yeah, like there's a lot of things about this could work. And I I say that with some trepidation because there are a lot of things about working from home and being solitary that are very dangerous, and
yeah,
I've definitely taken on side jobs that I don't need just to get out of the house at times when my mental health
totally,
was in a bad place. And
absolutely,
so, like, I'm all about working with people in person and seeing a therapist and things like that to make sure that these things aren't slowly grinding you down in ways you don't realize. But there's no reason that people can't work remotely in most of these jobs. And I understand the need for meetings and the excitement of like pulling somebody over to your station and being like, "Look at what I'm working on." But there are talented people out there who can't move, and you can use them. Um,
absolutely,
but Bungie was just like, "Okay, the world is opening back up. All these studios are telling you you have to move across the country and work in their office, even though you've been working for them remotely, and there's been no problem. If you don't want to do that, you can come work remote for us."
mm-hmm.
And they've just been, maybe their PR people have just been working their magic on me, but it seems like Bungie, it's also that I know a bunch of cool
They
people who work
got you,
for Bungie, but like it seems like a great place to work right now, and they're doing that.
sure,
And yeah, the thing about games that there's a weird dichotomy that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. We're we're one of the most closed off industries I've ever seen about the things we're working on.
yeah,
Like just pages of NDAs and can't share anything. Like it's just on the top of my brain because of the Grand Theft Auto leak.
oh
Like,
yeah, yeah, yep,
why don't we show all these people who are freaking out about the Grand Theft Auto leak are simply because they're consumers who seem to not understand how games get made. And I think that was surprising for a lot of the people in development, that people were so ignorant about the process that, like, the game doesn't really look like a game until, like, a month before it comes out, or 2 weeks before it comes out,
Yeah.
or something like that. Like, and if we were, I understand there's a lot of dangers about being open about your process, but there's gotta be a way that we can be less closed off and secretive about all this stuff, because, as you say, the actual community of working in games is not like that, because my my Twitter feed of audio people is all just people being like, "Look at this. Look at these." They can't show you what they're working on for their project, but they're like, "Look at this cool sound design technique that I figured out. Look at this thing that I recorded and how I recorded it." Like, everybody, programmers are like this too. They're like, I wanna share my cool tips even though I can't show you what I'm using this thing to do
Yeah.
in the project that I'm working, because I'm not legally allowed to. But, like, there's so much sharing and caring and wanting to lift people up, and then we're like, "But no," because even in film, you see, like, still photos or trailers or previs or stuff. Well, maybe you don't see previs until after it's out, but people are real weird about graphics. But even then, there's some behind the scenes stuff, and games just doesn't have any.
It is weird, and I don't. Yeah, I've thought about it. I don't know the reason. It's just like the media. They're afraid the media is going to take it and contort it, or like you said, stuff doesn't look. For the first 85% of dev, like it looks and runs terribly. So maybe that's a part of it.
Or people are afraid they're gonna steal your idea or something. I don't know.
Yeah,
But
there is a lot of, and like I could see that, like on the AAA space, particularly if you have a new idea or mechanic or something, like you really want to like hold on to that. But most of the time, I think people are a little overprotective of. But like we work with a lot of bigger global clients, and it's like, you want us to sign this NDA, we'll sign this NDA. We still have to look through it to make sure there's nothing like too crazy in there.
oh yeah, read your contracts, kids.
Yeah, but it's just kind of how the industry is, and it's how the industry is globally, which I think is really kind of interesting. But yeah, I agree. I think the people that are working in the industry, obviously a lot of toxicity on social media, a lot of toxicity around certain segments, the gaming base in particular, which I believe is just partly a maturity and age problem as well. Maturity and
Well, and it's
age
just a
mixed
law of
with,
numbers thing too. Like,
yeah.
human beings are garbage, and if you get enough of them, there's gonna be some garbage ones.
Well,
It's hopefully
my
you can avoid them. But
yeah, my big thing is that I think the games industry is, you've got a lot of younger people, some maturity things that also have a sort of ingrained understanding of how technology works. And so they like my parent, I always use my parents, my mom. I mean, and even when we were growing up, right? Like somebody would do something or something would happen and you'd be pissed about it and you would just like vent for like 20 seconds and then you'd be done. Cause like there's no, you're not going to like, there's nowhere to post it, right? There was no smartphones or social media. So you're just like, forget about it.
yeah, in
But
my day, we just screamed into a pillow and we liked it.
yeah, exactly. But you take into account that the people that are playing video games regularly also tend to have a better understanding of just technology in general. So they are going to have access to smartphones and social media and stuff like that. My mom is not going to launch on Twitter. It's just not going to happen.
Right.
But I agree. I think that just we're getting kind of the end here. I'm wrapping up. I think the industry as a whole is just it's a great place to be. This is an exciting time to be in the industry. There's a lot of unknowns about what's going on, but it's a fun ride. At least it's a ride. I don't know. But well, we're getting close here.
It is a job.
It is a job, yes,
that you could have.
And on that note, this has been the Volpe Creates Show, the weekly talk show about video games and creative technology. Jordan, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been a blast. I felt
Sure,
that
man.
this hour just like breezed by. So I appreciate it. Is there anywhere that people can contact you or connect with you if they were so interested?
Twitter's probably a good place. At Jordan Fehr, it's just my name. That's F as in Frank, EHR. Um, And if you're a musician, I'm trying to do more and more mastering work. So if you need another ear on your stuff you're working on for quality control and that end game punch up, that's my like side passion. Well, new obsession for the past like 3 years. Um, get at me.
Awesome. Right. Well, this has been another episode. We air every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. We'll hopefully be back next week. We'll confirm the guest. But again, you can follow us on the Twitters at Volpe Creates. You can join our Discord, volpecreates.com/Discord. We'll take you to it. And on behalf of myself, Lucas, Baby Girl, and Pumpkin, I want to thank you all for watching, and we will see you next week.